stories about water and urban places. This is Ideanthro.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Ideanthro. In this episode, we are going to show you a better way to score and rate the condition of water-sensitive urban design assets, bioretention systems, wetlands, and so on. In fact, if we're really feeling confident about this, we could make an argument that this is a better way to do condition assessment and condition scoring for any type of asset. To do that, of course, there's something contingent here, which is the word better. We're going to need to define what's currently going on. Why are we talking about this now? We are talking about this now because we have recently been doing work for a local government in Southeast Queensland, inspecting water-sensitive urban design assets out in the field. We have seen recently nearly 400 of them, and it gave us plenty of time to think about this. It's also a really good segue to say our bioretention in the real world training course has just been released. If this is something that sounds like it's of interest to you because you want to know how to look after, understand, and treat properly bioretention systems, but specifically how to do all those things by considering them as a whole, then this is the course for you. You can find it more at ideanthro.com/BITRW. That's bioretention in the real world, BITRW. ideanthro.com/BITRW. You can find out more, see a couple of example videos from the course, see an example from the written guide. And if you're keen and if you get in quick before the 31st of May 2019, which is only a couple of days away when this video is being released, if you get in quick and you enter the code BITRW25 at checkout, you'll get 25% off the normal price. Okay, back to the point here. We have recently had the chance to inspect a whole bunch of different water-sensitive urban design assets, including lots of bioretention systems, but also wetlands and sediment basins. And in the course of doing that, we had a lot of time to think about and mull over the pros and cons of different scoring methods. And because this had bothered us for ages, because typically, and I cut some slack here to WSID asset managers, because WSID is still a relatively new asset class, and it takes time to get these things right. But typically, condition scoring in asset management of water-sensitive urban design assets has been done in one of a few ways. Typically what happens in all cases is that you go out and you look at a whole bunch of individual components in the system and score each of them. Now, if you have heard our mantra as to why we created the bioretention in the real world training course, you realize that's already getting a little bit problematic because it's treating the individual components of the system separately, not treating the system as a whole. But I do get the logic in looking at each of the individual components. You give them a score, typically it's from 1 to 5, and then those individual scores are somehow rolled up to give a single score for the asset. And that's always really, really bothered me, because you see this done in a bunch of different ways. Sometimes it's a case of they pick the worst individual component score. Sometimes it's some kind of weighting system. Sometimes it's some kind of like a weighted average. Sometimes it's someone sat there and gone, look, the filter media and the plants are particularly important. The under drainage flush out points are nice, but they're less important, so we're going to weight that more than that. Like, it's these arbitrary, what's common to all these scoring systems, besides the fact that you're scoring individual components and then rolling it up as a whole, what's common to all of them is that they try and combine the individual component scores into a single score with no reflection of the real world interconnections between those components. No ability or no attempt to try and replicate actually how does a bioretention system work and how do the individual bits of it relate to each other and connect to each other. For example, if this particular part scores high or low, how does that influence the relative importance of this other particular score. So for example, if you had a system, a bioretention system, that scored really well for plant cover and moderately badly for the extent to which the filter media is clogged up and not draining, I would argue that that changes the importance of that clogging. Actually, not the clogging. Let's go to the presence of sediment on the surface. So let's compare two instances here. We've got this clear now. Let's compare an instance where we have a bioretention system with really good plant cover to one that's got fair to middling plant cover. But both of them have sediment accumulated on the surface. If we take the approach of take the worst score, and that becomes the overall, take the worst individual component score, and that becomes the overall worst score, that becomes the overall score for the system, then both of them are going to score similarly badly, because you'll pick the clogging score, and that will become the score for the system. As it turns out, the plant score on the system's not doing too well is probably not great either, but they'll both score similarly badly. But I would suggest to you that in the real world, the system that's got more plants is doing better. In fact, it's arguable that in the system that's got heaps of plants, even if there is some sediment on the surface, that system could still be draining nearly almost as new. So it's arguable that the significance of the sediment on the surface is completely negated, or its negative effects is almost completely negated by the plants. So what should in fact be happening is something where it's like, look, what effect do these two things together have on the functionality of the system? Poor plants, some sediment, collectively means probably poor treatment. Really good plants and some sediment probably collectively actually still means the system's doing pretty well. But does just doing a weighted average reflect that? Don't know. It doesn't necessarily. What we can say for sure is that the weighted average doesn't specifically reflect the functionality. It's just a metric. It's just look, we'll add these numbers together and see what we get. There's no reflection of the real world processes. And that bothers me, because that means it's highly likely that the scores we get are completely and utterly meaningless. Let me say that again. I believe that with every approach that I have ever seen to date, someone might have done it, I might not have seen it, right? Someone might have a really great system that I haven't seen. But for every attempt that I've seen so far to roll up individual component scores in bioretention systems to give an overall asset condition score, I believe that because it has no real basis in how the system behaves as a whole, that there is no evidence and no reason to think that it in any way actually reflects the functionality or the whatever we're actually going for with this bioretention system. It's just a number. In that respect, it gives you confidence that you know what's going on when you have utterly no reason to be confident what's going on. Now, a second ago, I mentioned this, or whatever we're trying to actually do with condition. Because for ages, I'd been bothered by that. I've been like, look, these ways of rolling up the scores don't make sense to me, but I couldn't really articulate. And you can see this is still new to me, because I'm not doing this as crisply as I'd like to be. But I couldn't articulate exactly why it bothered me and what the alternative was. And that's where things have changed for me. And the way that they changed for me, and this is in hindsight a fairly obvious thing to figure out, was I started thinking about, well, hang on, what are we actually using condition score for? Because it had bothered me. I was like, look, these scores we're getting, they're meaningless. Well, I just don't get them. But it was only when I asked myself, wait, hang on, what are people using condition score for? Because condition, when we have a single component a single item, whatever it is, it could be this rock, for argument's sake. When you've got a single thing, condition kind of makes sense. And be like, okay, it's good or bad. But when you're wrapping it up into a whole item comprised of a large number of separate parts that interconnect with each other, it never made sense to me what overall condition even was. Like, is there, I like to pose this question, is there even actually a real world thing as overall condition of a complex item? Is there such a thing as overall condition of my phone? I can definitely say there's condition of individual items. The screen protector, for example, has got heaps of chips out of it. The screen beneath it is totally fine because of the screen protector. The charging port at the bottom, I can talk about its condition. But collectively, the phone as a whole, what's its condition? Because some of the parts are terrible and other parts are pretty good and others are in the middle. And I was only able to answer this when I was like, look, what are we actually using condition for? And it turns out it's a surrogate. As far as I can tell, in asset management, condition scoring is typically used as an indication of one of either two things. It's either an indication of the likely remaining life of that thing and what's likely to happen in the future to it. So it's trying to present a window into the future. It's like, look, if it's a this, that tells us these things are likely to happen in the future. Or it's trying to tell us, look, this is how it is currently performing. This is its current performance of the system. This is what we're getting from it. We designed this bioretention system to treat stormwater, and this is how well it's performing. And I was like, okay, so this is what we're using it for. But this raises a problem. Because the elements that contribute to how well a bioretention system is performing now, which plants, filter media porosity, is water getting into the system? Like we've always said, to judge how well a bioretention system's going, you really need to ask yourself, is water getting through? Is water getting into the system? Is water getting through the media? And are there plants growing in it? If you answer those things and the extent to which it's doing each of those things, you have a pretty good idea of how well that system's doing. But if you're interested in knowing how long the system might last, then there's other things that you might care about. That erosion down the side of the weir that's risking completely eroding the bund of the system and causing the entire system to short circuit has a fundamental impact on the life of the system and its future functionality, but no impact on its current functionality. And this is an important realization because it means you can't have a single score for a system. A single condition score doesn't tell you usefully, or doesn't necessarily, you could get lucky, but it doesn't necessarily tell you stuff about this system's likely future state, its lifespan, what condition it's likely to be in at some point in the future. Let's say, I said condition. Let's say that again. Its lifespan and its likely functionality at some point in the future. But on the other hand, you need to roll the numbers up differently for its current functionality. And so this is my takeaway from this. I don't think we should be doing condition scoring of certainly not WUSIT assets. I think, but I'm less confident about this, that we could extend this argument to all types of infrastructure. The reality is, if we care about what the system's likely to be like in the future and we care about its current functionality, then we should have ways of rolling up the scores to give a score of current condition and a score of likely future, of current functionality. See, condition, it's just, you just say it all the time and it's meaningless. We need a way, we should be scoring a couple of things. We should be scoring current functionality and some indication of what the system's going to be like in the future, or its likely projected life. And you do that by taking each of the individual component scores and adding them together differently. And the good news is that suddenly, once we get rid of this arbitrary idea of condition, which is like, and we dig into something that's far more practical and real, being functionality or likely future lifespan or whatever you care about, then it suddenly gets a lot easier to do the maths to create the scoring system. And I've had a crack at it, but for a buyer retention system, now I'm not saying it's super simple, but it really just becomes a number of if-then statements. You could write it into Excel. If you've got even a little bit of basic coding ability in Excel, ability to use if statements and the like, you could write it in. So it's something like, look up the score for the inlet and where the water's getting in. And if that scores really well, then the functionality remains high. But then you look up the score for how well the media is draining. And if that's still really good, the score remains high. But if that's poor, then you lose some of the score. So we've got only a portion remaining. So maybe it was 1 for water getting in, but then because the filter media was a little bit clogged, we dropped it to maximum possible score because not as much water is getting treated as it should be. We dropped it back down to 2, for example. You dropped 20% of the possible score off because it was 20% clogged, let's say. And then, okay, so sweet. We've got 80% of its possible functionality left, and then we look at the plants. And maybe we're like, look, if it scores good, then it keeps it 2. If it's for some reason is exceptionally well vegetated, or it's got particularly good species at unclogging filter media, then maybe it can bump back up. But you get the point here. Suddenly, because if we're talking about functionality, which is real, then we can look at real processes within systems and look at the scores from individual components and how they reflect those real processes. And you can give a real score. Same thing for likely predicted age of the system, or likely lifespan of the system. You can look at stuff that's particularly important there. The reality is that the presence of plants in a bioretention system doesn't have a heck of a lot to do with its likely long-term life. Not overall, because if you lose all the plants but everything else stays good, you can just replant the system. It hasn't fundamentally reached the end of its life. It needs some rehabilitation. It's been run down, but the lack of plants in a system doesn't fundamentally decrease the overall life of the system as a whole. But something like that overflow weir erosion that's likely to create a massive failure in the bund of the system and wash away heaps of filter media and is a fundamental threat to the system, yeah, now that should be suggesting that's reducing life of the system and prompt you to maybe do something quicker. So let's wrap this back up. This all ties into this current theme of ours, which is treat these assets as systems. This is why this ties in with the release of our bioretention in the real world course. Ideanthro.com/BITRW. Head there. If you, by the 31st of May 2019, enter the code BITRW25 at checkout, you'll get 25% off. It is our suggestion, it is our idea, it is our proposal that asset management, particularly for worsted assets, but we do think this could be extended to other types of assets. But let's just talk about worsted assets. That for asset management of worsted assets, we should be parking the concept of a condition score and instead replacing it with scores for the things that we are actually caring about and that we are currently using condition score as a surrogate for. So what you should be asking yourself is, what do I currently, in my asset management world, what do I currently use this condition score for? I use it for determining how functioning the asset base is. I use it for estimating the life and depreciation. Okay, those are the things. Let's just create scores for each, because those will be far, far, far more meaningful than this amorphous, meaningless condition score. That's the episode. I want to leave that with you. I am proposing that we fairly fundamentally change something that's pretty set in stone in actually, I don't think it has to be set in stone, but it's pretty well established practice, which is the score condition. I am suggesting that we need to change that and score some different stuff. Okay, as always, thank you for tuning in. I would love to hear what you think of these ideas. You can get in touch in a whole bunch of different ways. You can find contact details for us at ideanthro.com. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and occasionally on Instagram. And of course, all these videos are on YouTube. Hit us up through any of those methods if you so desire. Okay, have a good one. Thank you for tuning in.
Before you go, our best episodes come from your questions. This knowledge base, these discussions that are Ideanthro improve with your contribution. So if there's a topic, an idea, a concept that you would like us to explore, come and ask us. You know where to find us. www.ideanthro.com/contact. You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and that place you get your good podcasts from. You know where to find us. We look forward to hearing from you. We'll see you soon.